ghosting. You ever been ghosted? Better yet, or perhaps maybe worse yet, has someone ever ghosted you? It's a very modern day term if you're not familiar with it. If you're not familiar with it, it's probably a good thing. But in 2017, this officially became a word in the English-speaking language. It went into the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And here's the definition that they provide for ghosting. The act or practice of abruptly cutting off all contact with someone without explanation, by no longer accepting or responding to phone calls, instant messages, etc. So simply put, when you ghost someone or if someone ghosts you, they just, boom, out of nowhere, cut off all contact from you, and you don't know why. Now, obviously, this is extremely relationally painful when this happens. And I've noticed something ever since COVID. It seems like ghosting has gone up exponentially. And to use the metaphor of a rubber band, I think a lot of us humans in American culture before COVID, most of us were kind of like loose rubber bands. You know, those ones that are already kind of like stretched out wide. And they have a lot of give and take to them. They can pull them. You know, they're flexible. A lot of give and take. They don't break and snap. I'm convinced, though, that since 2020, the last 2.5 years, most of us have now become like those really tightly wound rubber bands, where if you pull them and you stretch them enough, they will break. In a lot of ways, I think COVID did a lot of things. One of them, though, is I think COVID took a curtain and just pulled back a lot of emotional unhealth that was already there. But it came into focus quite quickly. It accelerated maybe some things that were already going on for people. All of this to say, this has made me wonder something. Psychologically, I'm just so fascinated. What causes someone to ghost someone? Meaning, what are like the inner emotional workings that are going on in their soul that cause or motivate them to ghost someone? Now, obviously, a couple disclaimers. I'm not a psychologist. This isn't based off of any type of proven research, though maybe it's out there. I don't know. This is just something that, honestly, in the pastoral world, I've just been wondering the last couple years, and I've come to this conclusion. I think by and large, there's always exceptions. But by and large, I think it's because we treat people as objects. And I think we treat people as objects even subconsciously. So you may not think you do, but you do. Put otherwise, I think we view each other as commodities to consume. We treat each other as an it and not as a human being made in the image of God. And when I say that we treat people as an object or a commodity or an it, I think it's because we are actually treating someone as a means to an end. Here's what I mean. I think we love someone, we treat someone well because they do something for us. We get something from them. So it could be maybe you're in the business world and you love someone and you're really nice to someone because they help your business grow. They buy your product, they increase your sales, networking, they say a good word about your reputation. Really what's going on is you're getting something from them. It could be that you love someone and you treat them nice because they make you feel good. They just encourage you, they affirm you, all of your ideas. They're like, man, those are the best. And really, you're kind of getting this emotional high from them. They're making you feel good. Now, none of that's wrong by itself. We all love being around people that make us feel good. That's not a bad thing. But I think there's something too that it's easy for us to love someone who makes us feel good and brings something positive to us. And here is the issue. When disagreement comes, when conflict comes, when an issue comes, when they think something that you don't agree with, what happens? Adios. And you ghost them. We've become the tight rubber band and not the loose rubber band. Another disclaimer I have to make, and this one I'm so sensitive to. There is a sense in which sometimes you need to ghost someone. Meaning this. In some ways, what we're going to be talking about this morning, kind of in the second half of this talk, is like healthy boundaries. So I just want you to be so clear that if you are in a situation of abuse, whether it's physically, sexually, emotionally, there is a sense where you should not be putting yourself in situations where someone can continue to abuse you. In that sense, it is okay, not even okay, it's actually the emotionally healthy, mature thing to cut off that relationship, at least for the time being. So I'm not saying that you can never kind of take some distance from someone. One of maybe the only good excuse I can think of for that is if there's abuse going on in some shape or form. It's a toxic relationship. But that's not really what I'm talking about this morning. I'm talking about loving others well when it's hard to love them. Loving others well when they don't necessarily give you something positive. Love is such an interesting word and concept in our culture. I've yet to meet someone who doesn't like the word love. Love is a positive word. It's a good word. It's kind of, like this emotional snowflake word. Everyone wants love, but the thing about love is that loving people well is actually really hard. Scazzaro, in his book, he quotes the famous author Dostoevsky in his well-known novel, and a monk says this: "Love in practice is a harsh and dreadful thing compared to love in dreams." Love in practice is a harsh and dreadful thing compared to love in dreams. We love to talk about love in theory, and if you're a part of the hippie movement, but to actually do it is quite profound. And it's profound because it's really hard to enter the world of someone else that you don't understand, don't agree with, and still love them well. Many would say that this is actually the highest form of love. We call it empathy. But as we're going to see today, Jesus modeled entering the world of the other to love them well, and it was so much more than just empathy. So here's the game plan. We are in the second to last Sunday of the series. Next Sunday, we conclude the series. Then we move on to Palm Sunday, Easter Sunday. And this year, we're actually going to kind of extend that time. We usually call that week Holy Week, deservingly so. We're going to do a 4-week series called Holy Weeks, plural, because the church often tends to forget about the Ascension and Pentecost. And if you don't know what those are, be here those 2 Sundays. But for now, loving others well. Here's what we've done so far the last 6 weeks. We need to go beneath the surface of our lives. We want nothing to do with the shallow form of Christianity. We want to revisit our past so that we can move forward. We want to learn how to deal with grief and loss. We want to slow down our lives and live in some form of prayer and Sabbath rest. And here's the point. There is an order to this. When you begin to live this way, you will begin to find emotional healing. And here's the point. It's when you begin that process of healing that you'll then be able to love others well. You ever heard the phrase that hurt people hurt people? Hurt people hurt people. So if you had to give like the objective of the Christian faith as Jesus defined it, it's really easy. It's this: love God and love others. Really easy to say, hard to do. Love God and love all others. All of this leads us to this question this morning. How do we love others well? How do we love others well? Our text this morning is Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2. If you're old school like me and you like having a physical Bible, there's a free one underneath your chair, page 802, the orange Bible underneath your chair. Philippians chapter 2, we're going to start at verse 5. Here's the context. Paul, the Apostle Paul, he's writing to the church in Philippi. And, I was just reminded of this past week. When we read the scriptures, this is real stuff. Like Paul he's writing to a community like this with real people and real issues. And they probably didn't love each other well. This is not fiction. Here's what he writes, chapter 2, verse 5. In your relationships with one another, boom, there it is. He's going to set things up. Here's how I want you to love each other. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, Jesus was God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. Jesus, God, became human. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Author Ronald Rolheiser shares this amazing, marvelous story about this 4-year-old child who one night awoke frightened. And this little girl was convinced that there were monsters and spooks in her room. And so alone, she ran off to her parents' bedroom. And her mother got up, calmed her down, took her by the hand, and led her back to her own room, where she turned on the light and she reassured the child with these words: "You needn't be afraid. You are not alone here. God is in the room with you." To which the child replied, "I know that God is here, but I need someone in this room who has some skin." Paul, in this passage that I just read, let me read it again. Here's what he says of Jesus. Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. Jesus put some skin on himself. And being found in appearance as a man. What Paul is describing here is what theologians call the incarnation. The incarnation is a fancy word for this crazy, insane, mysterious doctrine that God, the creator of the universe, put skin on himself. That God in Jesus made himself a human man in the first century who was a Jewish carpenter. He put skin on himself. I mean, this is every year in Advent, December. We celebrate this at Christmas. This is why kind of a theme in Christmas is always God with us. It isn't God with us in theory. No, it's God walked this earth. Remember the child's reply, I know that God is here, but I need someone in the room who's got some skin on. The good news of God is that Jesus put some skin on. The proof of that is a baby in the manger. And the whole story of the scriptures climaxes John 3:16. So God, what is the word there? Loved the world that he did what? That he sent his son to become one of us, to rescue us. Now, this exact same thing is said in another iconic passage, John chapter 1. Don't worry about turning there. But it's the same profound truth. John 1:14, the Word, referring to Jesus, became flesh, and he made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son. There's a modern-day paraphrase called The Message, which translates this, and I love this. The Word became flesh and blood, and he moved into the neighborhood. Here's the point. Love, at its core, is incarnational, meaning love is about being fully present to someone. Love isn't just a noun, love is a verb, and love isn't just a feeling. Love is entering the world of someone else. Pete Scazzaro writes this. This is absolutely fantastic. God knows we needed his skin, not simply the knowledge that he is everywhere. People today are desperate for skin, to be loved, for someone to incarnate with them. For this reason, people will pay $100 to $150 an hour to a therapist to enter and to care about their world, to eventually love them. Today, God still has physical skin, and he can be seen, touched, heard, and tasted. You're wondering how? Brothers and sisters, through his body, the church, in whom he dwells. We are called, in the name of Jesus, and by the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, to be skin for people around us. We are to incarnate the love of Jesus to everyone in our relationships. So, when we talk about loving others, we really need to focus on when it's loving difficult people. It should go without saying that it's much easier to love those who are just like you. When you get married, chances are, again, there's always the exception, but chances are it's really easy to love your spouse. Things are new, exciting. That's why they call it the honeymoon period. Except that one time where I was in Cancun and I had a sunburn and my wife slapped my back. But anyways, that's another story. Come on. If you're on a sports team and you win a championship, it's really easy to love your teammates. They say that winning cures everything. Right? It's really easy to love others who have the same political views as you. It's really easy. It was really easy in 2020 and 2021 and 2022 to love others who have the same exact mask policy as you. Now, there's some giggling there, but let me tell you, I was a part of some intense conversations. Never thought it would come to that. It's really easy to love someone when they buy you In-N-Out. Here's the real discussion. How do we become emotionally mature adults who love others when we'd rather ghost them? How do we love others when there's conflict and disagreement? How do we love others when they're so different than us? Now it's quiet. So here's what I want to do this morning. Love is such a theoretical word, but we need to put some skin on it. This is about as practical as you're going to get. And some people don't like practical. And it's because it's actually harder to do. It's more exciting to talk in theory. But I want to use some tools from Scazzero that literally, in this case, literally puts language of how we can love others well. The first one, in order to love someone well, you need to first listen to them. Listening allows you to enter the world of the other. I've shared this David Augsburger quote before. I had him as a professor in seminary. It's so good. He's got this famous line, being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. If you listen to someone, you're going to make them feel loved. So what does this look like practically? Scazzero calls this incarnational listening. And this is just basic like listening and speaking exercises. If you've done any type of marital counseling, chances are a therapist has probably walked you through this, and there's a reason for that. So check this out. We'll put this on the screen. This is the only time I'll ever say, if you have a phone, whip it out, take a picture of it, because this will help you. When you are the speaker, so when you're in a conversation and you're speaking, speak using I statements rather than you statements. In other words, talk about your own thoughts and feelings. The minute that you start saying you're going to put that person on the defensive, and it's going to become accusatory. Say I. Keep your statements brief. Don't preach at someone when there's conflict and disagreement. That won't go well. Keep your statements brief. Here's an interesting one. Stop to let the other person paraphrase what you've said. Include feelings in your statements. And be honest, clear, direct, and respectful. People err usually on the spectrum. They're either honest and clear and direct, and they're not respectful, or someone's respectful and they're not really honest. Now, as the listener, if you're listening, here's what you need to do. Give the speaker your full attention. What do most people do in hard conversations? You're thinking about how you're going to respond and refute their horrible argument. What if we just actually listened? What if we stepped into their shoes? What are they feeling? Avoid judging or interpreting. Reflect back as accurately as you can what you heard them say. I've tried to get better at this myself. So if I'm in a conversation, I say, hey, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is X, Y, and Z. When you think they're done, ask, is there more? Not in a sassy way. And this one is gold. When they are done, ask them, of everything you have shared, what is the most important thing you want me to remember? Man, if someone would ask me that in a conversation, they say, Mark, you know, of everything you've shared, what's the one thing that you want me to take home and just make sure that I get? That would make me feel so loved and heard. Scazzero, in a separate book called Emotionally Healthy Church, he writes this. I think this is a prophetic call for the church. When is the last time someone said to you, let me tell you about those Christians? They are fantastic listeners. I've never seen a group of people more interested to know my world, curious, asking questions, listening to me. You know how Christians are thought of in the world by many non-Christians? Not good listeners. What an opportunity for us to love others well. Love listens. That's why Alpha is a powerful outreach tool, because it's built around the philosophy of we don't preach at you. We're not going to try to give you cookie-cut answers. We actually just want to listen to you and love you. Here's another exercise that he gives. It's called validation. And the thing about validation is that validation does not mean that you have to agree with someone. But it does mean that you enter their world and you try to grasp their point of view. And to validate someone, it takes humility, and you can't fake it. Don't try to fake this. You need to try to genuinely enter their world and their point of view. Again, very practical. Here are some helpful phrases to use in a conversation. I can see how you would see it that way, even if you don't agree. From your perspective, that makes sense. Hey, I can understand that. That makes sense. That's letting them know that you're listening to them. Again, I'm passionate about this because I see this all the time. Just because you validate someone doesn't mean that you have to agree with them. In our culture right now, because we live in a hyper-political kind of climate where everything's polarized, we think that in order to love someone, you have to agree with them, and if you disagree with someone, then you can't love them. No, that's a lie from Satan. Last time I checked, Jesus is pretty clear that you have to love everyone. Did Jesus agree with everyone? No. Did he love everyone? Yes. So this would solve so many emotional, relational issues if we were able to do this. Disagreement does not mean disrespect. The way that we love someone that we disagree with is by being with them, listening to them, and validating where they're coming from. Love listens. Again, you don't have to agree with them. Jesus doesn't say you must agree with everyone. No. In some sense, and I am preaching to myself right now, in order to love others well, you will have to embrace conflict. Now, here's a caveat I got to put. This doesn't mean that you should pursue conflict, but it means that you shouldn't avoid it. There are people out there, we all know someone like this, where they're just like on the lookout for conflict. Everything's a battle to pick, and it's just like, dude, chill out. So I'm not saying pursue conflict, but don't avoid it. Your calling as a follower of Jesus is not to be a peacekeeper, but to be a peacemaker. That is what Jesus said and did. Notice the difference. Peacekeeper, peacemaker. Here's a fascinating thing to look, and this has changed the way that I read the life of Jesus in the Gospels. Jesus never avoided conflict. Jesus had actually a lot of bones to pick with a lot of religious people. Did he still love all of them? Yeah, he loved them perfectly. Here's the last thing I want to go over. We're going to spend some time on this one. What's so important to emotionally and maturely love others well is that you cannot lose yourself in the process. Meaning this, we are called to enter the world of the other, but you cannot lose your own identity when you do that. We are not supposed to become chameleons, where you just take on the opinions and beliefs and thoughts of those that you happen to be with. That is actually an incredibly insecure person. And the best example of this, as they always say in Sunday school class, is Jesus. We've been talking about the incarnation. Jesus literally entered our world. Came down as a human, as a man. He entered our world out of love and empathy. But check this out. He didn't forego his deity. Meaning Jesus didn't stop being God. Jesus was, and it was only something he could do, he was able to be fully human and fully God at the same time. Now, theologians that have spent thousands of years talking about this, figuring out, and it's crazy, it's mysterious, we don't understand it, and that's okay. But the point is, Jesus was fully human, fully God at the same time. He entered our world out of love and empathy, but he didn't forego his divine identity. When you enter into relationships with others, and they're difficult, and they will be, relationships and people are messy. That's why church is messy. We need to enter the world, but that doesn't come at a cost of losing our own. Jesus didn't. I remember very distinctly, a little over 5 years ago, wasn't here. Our previous church, we actually, part of the story is that we were in the process of interviewing here. And we had lots going on. So I was in the midst of interviewing to be the lead pastor here. Parker had just been born, so we have a newborn. My wife and I were both working full-time as pastors. We had just bought a house in the Long Beach area, and then lo and behold, 16 months later, we're looking at selling it. No one plans on doing that. A bunch of other stuff going on at that time. Our lives were cram-packed, that's my point. And a good friend of mine, had known him for years, going back to kind of the college time, he reached out to me, and I was both his friend and his pastor. And he said, hey, Mark, going through some really, really, really tough marital issues right now. Could you help me out? Could you walk alongside me? I said, absolutely. Dude, sign me up. I'm in. I had learned, though, at that point, through a couple years of ministry, that in order to love others well and to care for them, you need to set up boundaries. And not only boundaries, but there needs to be clear expectations. And so I told this person, I said, hey, I'm in. I'm with you. We're going to go through this valley together. And I said, in order for me to fully help you during this time, here are the things that here's how I want us to work this out. Here's when we should meet. Here are the issues that we need to go through. And just laid out all the expectations very clearly. Okay, perfect, sounds good. All right, I mean, a part of actually loving others well is accountability. Accountability is actually for the person, it's not against them. And in this instance, it was a messy situation. I was also having to set up boundaries for my own family. Because if I just enter into his world completely and fully and lose mine, then my marriage, my kids, they lose me. This is very similar. You ever kind of wonder when you're on an airplane before you leave and they give the oxygen mask thing? Now, most people don't listen anymore because we all have our headphones on. But if you're like one of the two people listening, what do they say? They say, if you have kids with you, if you don't have kids, it doesn't apply to you, but if you have kids with you, make sure that you put your oxygen mask on first and then help your child. And it sounds really harsh. Like, dude, you don't want us to care for our kids? No, actually they do. And the point is, and they've done studies on this. This is why airlines tell you to do this. If you don't have your mask on and you're not receiving oxygen, you actually won't be able to help your kids. Your kids aren't going to be able to put the mask on themselves. Is mom or dad, is having a hard time breathing, then they can't help them, and then everyone goes down. It's the exact same thing with loving others well. If you lose your own sense of oxygen, you are worthless in helping others out. So I set boundaries. And this person didn't follow through. And it broke my heart. Honestly, did. But honestly, it was a part of loving them well. In a lot of ways, I would say that loving others well, in that context, comes down to expectations. The problem for many of us, myself included, as Scazzaro says, is that our expectations are this: unconscious, unrealistic, unspoken, or not agreed upon. In order to love someone well, in an emotionally healthy, mature way, instead, here's what your expectations need to be. Last slide. First, they need to be conscious. You have to become aware of the expectations that you have for the other person. Some of us have expectations of others. I have expectations of others that I've assumed but not been aware of, and then I wonder why I get frustrated. Secondly, realistic. Ask yourself if your expectations regarding the other person are realistic. There are expectations that are realistic, and I think we should have high expectations. So that's a mark of a good culture. But are they realistic? Third, and this is the key one, are they spoken? You have to speak your expectations clearly, directly, and respectfully to the other person. And then lastly, are they agreed upon? In order for my expectations to be valid, the other person must be aware of and agree to them. Otherwise, it's simply a hope. This stuff may seem like really basic and simple, and you're like, I think less than maybe 5 or 10% of people are comfortable doing these things. I want to end with these words from Scazzaro. Jesus modeled incarnating love when he took on flesh, entered our world, and walked in our shoes. His love compelled him to cross two worlds, heaven and earth, and live among us. In order for us to love others as Jesus did, we too need to cross into other people's worlds, enter life in their shoes, while holding on to our own world as well. It's a very tough invitation. But that is the practice of loving others that Jesus literally modeled for us. That's like some good jazz there or something. And get me dancing up here. You don't want to see that. I'm going to invite the worship team up. And here's the question I want us to chew on. Who in your life, right now, flesh and blood, a real person in your real life, who do you need to love well? Who do you need to love well? Whose world do you need to enter? And it may just frustrate you thinking about that. I disagree with what they're saying. They don't understand me. I get it. Trust me, I get it. But how can you enter their world and be the skin of Jesus to them? Why? Because that's exactly what Jesus did for us. No one loved us more than Jesus. Became one of us to die for us. And when that melts your heart, you are led into doing the same thing for others. Maybe not because you want to or because it's easy. But the good news of Jesus has just grasped you in such a way that it's like, oh man, this is just overflow now. There'll be a prayer team up here. Maybe you're here, and honestly, you don't want to love someone. Maybe it's an invitation for you. I don't want to do this, God. And so you just want people to pray over you. Pray over you. I've kind of chuckled sometimes to myself. We have a lot of discipleship classes for a lot of things, but I've yet to be a part of a discipleship class that's how to love your enemies well. That's because no one wants to do it. It's not cool. It's not fun. But it sure is Jesus-y, though. Who do you need to love well? Could we stand? If you're comfortable, you don't have to. You just extend your hands. Let's just quiet our hearts. There's no hype. There's no manipulation. You guys know the drill by now. We just want to wait on the Spirit of God. Come, Holy Spirit. Maybe you're here and you're struggling with bitterness. Would you come forward? Receive prayer for that bitterness. You're in a tough situation. You feel like you can't have joy. You want joy? You just come forward. Have someone pray for you. Minister to us, Spirit.